Have you ever noticed that there's an instinct in women that no one dares to talk about? A desire so deep and voracious that it escapes even their own understanding, and that, when ignored, can destroy relationships, hearts, and even those who try to love. In this video, we are going to cross a forbidden mirror. I will reveal the hidden truth behind this invisible impulse, this silent hunger that consumes everything around it, including you. Get ready to see what no one has ever dared to show. If topics like psychology, philosophy, and the darkness of the human soul interest you, subscribe to the channel now. Have you ever gone through situations where small comments or subtle attitudes made you doubt your own worth? Leave your answer in the comments. For more than 1 century, female desire has been the subject of study and fascination for great thinkers like Freud and Jung. But the true and brutal answer about what a woman really wants still remains hidden in the shadows of the psyche. Freud, with his theories of libido and the unconscious, and Jung, with his archetypes and the idea of the shadow, were pioneers in bringing hidden aspects of the mind to light, but neither of them dared to face, with the necessary clarity and frankness, the raw and instinctive desire that burns silently inside the feminine. This desire is not something sweet, delicate, or romantically idealized. It is a primitive force, almost wild, that escapes rationality and often disguises itself as a quest, hunger, and even emotional destruction. It is a longing for something impossible to name, an inner absence that finds no rest, and that defies all conventional explanations of love, connection, and belonging. The feminine psyche carries, according to Jung, a deep shadow that often not even the woman herself knows, a shadow that manifests itself not as malice, but as an invisible hunger, a consuming void. This void, this unhealed wound, does not ask merely for affection or presence, but for a kind of inner salvation, an integration that cannot be given by anyone external. When Freud and Jung spoke of desire, they focused on what could be analyzed through sexuality, persona, and social archetypes. However, the brutality of this inner hunger, a bottomless hole that insists on being filled, was largely neglected. This hunger transforms love into addiction, tenderness into control, and affection into a compulsion for emotional consumption. It is an invisible cycle that, if ignored, destroys everything around it, including those who dare to love this woman intensely. This silent hunger is in reality a reflection of the existential loneliness that many women carry, a feeling of invisibility that crosses the soul and cannot be filled with external validations. From there, an insatiable desire is born that does not seek merely to be loved, but to be seen, chosen, desired on a level that surpasses the superficial. However, the cruel paradox is that when someone finally offers that stability and true presence, that same hunger rejects, sabotages, and runs away. Not out of malice, but because what she wants is not outside, it is inside, but it has not yet been found or accepted. Thus, female desire, far from being a simple plea for love, is a desperate search for internal relief, an unconscious attempt to silence the void that continues to scream, even in the moments of greatest surrender. Therefore, understanding female desire in its essence is to look into this internal abyss, into the invisible wound that neither Freud nor Jung had the courage to name with brutality. It is to understand that it is not just a matter of relationships or attraction, but of an invisible war between what she feels and what she denies, between the deep need and the fear of facing that need. It is to realize that this desire, when ignored, does not disappear. It only transforms into a vicious cycle of seeking and rejecting, consuming everyone around, including the woman who carries it. Only with this brutal sincerity is it possible to break the cycle and begin the true journey of healing and self-knowledge, where desire ceases to be a destructive hunger and becomes an invitation to integration and genuine love. This video does not come to point fingers or judge anyone, nor to justify behaviors or seek culprits. It is, above all, a mirror, an invitation for each person, especially you who are watching, to bravely face the reflection of a reality that many avoid. What appears in this mirror is not the image of a cruel, manipulative, or perverse woman, but rather the portrait of a silent and profound hunger that inhabits the unconscious. This hunger chooses neither victims nor culprits. It simply exists, driven by inner wounds that have been ignored, repressed, and never truly faced. Looking into this mirror means accepting the possibility of seeing something that disturbs, that frightens, but that is essential for understanding the invisible dynamics that govern many relationships. When we speak of this consuming hunger, we are talking about an emotional shadow that is not limited to external behaviors, but touches the core of existence, identity, and the need for belonging. It is a void that, when unrecognized, devours everything around it, including those who try to approach with love and sincerity. Therefore, this video is not an attack on women nor an empty criticism, but an attempt to give voice to what usually remains hidden between the lines of emotional conflicts. It exposes an uncomfortable truth. Often, what appears as rejection, control, or destructive instinct is, in reality, the echo of an ancestral pain that has not been welcomed. It is the silent scream of a fragmented soul that desperately seeks to be whole. When looking into this mirror, the challenge is not to blame the reflection that appears, but to understand the origin of that image and what it reveals about our own expectations, fears, and limitations. It is an invitation to deep empathy, not only to understand the other, but to recognize that we all carry inner shadows that influence how we love, project, and relate. This mirror also shows that, often, the cycle of pain and emotional consumption neither begins nor ends in the behavior of the other, but in invisible patterns that imprison us. By confronting them, we do not seek to change the other, but to transform the way we relate to ourselves and to what we project in our emotional bonds. Finally, this video serves as a warning and a hope. A warning about how the denial of these inner wounds can generate silent destruction, and a hope for those willing to face their own shadow. The mirror it presents is not a tool of punishment, but a key to self-knowledge and healing. It is through this honest and non-judgmental look that we can break cycles of pain, understand the true nature of desire and need, and finally learn to love in a more conscious way, starting, above all, with loving ourselves. This video does not accuse, it reflects. It does not condemn, it reveals. And whoever has the courage to look at this reflection holds in their hands the possibility of profound change. The feminine desire that goes beyond the ordinary, the one that seems insatiable, is not simply a quest for attention, affection, or presence. It goes far beyond the surface of gestures and words, diving into a primitive hunger that lives in the depths of the psyche. This consuming desire is not romantic passion, nor a simple physical need. It is a visceral urgency that manifests as an invisible emptiness, an internal hole that no relationship, no matter how intense, can fill. When a woman looks with eyes that ask for everything but never reveal what, when her love turns into urgency and then despair, what is happening is something far more complex and painful than one can imagine. This desire is not seeking someone to complete a fairy tale. It cries out, desperately, for relief from the chronic loneliness that inhabits the unconscious. What many confuse with instability or manipulation is, in truth, the reflection of this emptiness that insists on being filled with external sources, because the woman has not yet learned to look within and embrace her own shadow. This shadow, as Jung explained, is the unconscious part of the psyche where fears, wounds, and denied needs reside. Within it exists an archetypal figure that few recognize, the devourer, a force that does not seek to destroy out of malice, but that is wounded and incessantly seeks something to satisfy its inner hunger. She desires love, yes, but not just any love. She desires to be seen, chosen, and, above all, to feel that she matters. However, this search outside herself will never be enough, because what is at stake is the right to love oneself. And that right can only be conquered when she stops running and faces her own darkness. This insatiable hunger creates a cruel cycle. The woman approaches with intensity and surrender, feeding on validation and the charm of the other. But as soon as the glow of novelty fades, the emptiness returns with force and the search begins again. It is not about promiscuity or a conscious game, but about emotional survival that turns the pursuit of affection into an addiction. Each new relationship is an attempt to cover the hole that screams inside. A moment of temporary relief followed by the same growing anguish. The intensity that initially seduces ends up turning into distance, indifference, and rejection. Not because the feeling has died, but because the shadow insists on protecting itself from the silence and truth that accompany it. The desire that consumes is, in essence, a desire for recognition, not for possession. And this distinction is the key to understanding such a complex dynamic. Finally, understanding this insatiable desire requires courage. Courage to see beyond the surface, to recognize that what seems like a whim or an irrational need is in truth a silent scream for healing and belonging. There is no way to satisfy an emptiness that is born within with external stimuli alone. An inner dive is needed, a solitary journey where the woman can face her shadows and rebuild her sense of self-worth. Until this happens, the cycle will continue, and those around will often be only a temporary source of emotional oxygen, essential for momentary survival, but unable to quench the deep thirst. This consuming desire is not an immutable feminine mystery, but an urgent call for transformation and liberation that begins when the soul decides to stop running. The relief that does not relieve, the search for someone to build with. When a woman says she wants someone to build with, to care for, to stay by her side, she is expressing a legitimate and profound longing. However, this desire for stability often hides a painful paradox. The figure she seeks to share a life with is not the true remedy for her loneliness or her inner wounds. The relief she looks for in another person is not a lasting balm, but a momentary pause, a temporary truce for the emptiness that insists on demanding attention. The search for someone who represents safety and love is, in reality, an attempt to silence an inner scream, an urgency that, when not faced, consumes and wears out both the one who seeks and the one who offers. This apparent relief reveals itself as an illusion because it does not rely on inner transformation, self-acceptance, and self-love, but on emotional dependence and the expectation that the other will be able to fill a hole that only she herself can fill. The woman who longs for building often carries within her a wound that remains, invisible even to herself, a sense of insufficiency, of invisibility, of guilt for being too much or not enough. This repressed pain creates a cycle where the presence of the other is desired with urgency, but at the same time, sabotaged unconsciously. Because, deep down, the real challenge is not finding someone, but facing herself without masks and without escapes. When the figure of the partner finally appears, bringing promises of care and companionship, the relief that should come along can turn into discomfort and rejection. This happens because the inner emptiness does not allow itself to be filled easily. It resists and twists at the possibility of true roots, which imply facing old fears and accepting her own shadow. The relationship, which seemed to be the cure, becomes a mirror reflecting unresolved pains and conflicts, generating frustration and distance. The woman does not reject love, but rejects the fear of facing herself, and this rejection manifests in sabotages, withdrawals, and repeated patterns that confuse those around her. Thus, the relief that does not relieve becomes an invisible prison, where the search for someone to build with is not just a desire for partnership, but an existential challenge. To break this cycle, it is necessary for the woman to stop projecting outside herself the solution to her needs and turn her gaze inward with courage and honesty. True building begins in the encounter with oneself, in the acceptance of her imperfection, and in the courage to face her own loneliness. Only from this inner reintegration is it possible to offer authentic and stable love, which does not depend on escape or compensation, but is born from completeness and true presence, something that transcends momentary relief and becomes the foundation for a genuine and lasting relationship. The cycle of hunger, the incessant search for something that never satisfies, there is a deep and silent hunger that inhabits the feminine psyche. A hunger that is not physical, nor even emotional in the simple sense, but something far more ancestral and primitive. This hunger is a lack that transcends time, that is born from the most intimate wounds of the soul, and that finds no rest in anything the external world can offer. It is an emptiness that screams for fulfillment, and because it is neither understood nor seen, it feeds an endless cycle of search and frustration. What she seeks always seems to be ahead, in the next person, the next experience, the next promise of satisfaction. But paradoxically, each new encounter reveals the same emptiness and rekindles the same insatiable hunger. This cycle of hunger is not just a sequence of relationships or passing desires, but a deep psychological pattern that feeds on itself. The more one tries to satisfy the lack with attention, affection, validation, or momentary pleasure, the more the inner emptiness becomes voracious and urgent. What was once calm turns into a storm, and the inner peace, so desired, slips through the fingers. This incessant search is not the result of promiscuity or lack of value, but a desperate attempt to survive existential despair, the chronic feeling of being invisible and unrecognized in her truest essence. The cycle traps both the one who lives this hunger and the one who tries to be its object. At its core, what repeats itself is a kind of silent dialogue between the unconscious shadow and the external world. The woman seeks an external validation, which she has not learned to find within herself: self-love, acceptance, the feeling of being enough. But since the emptiness cannot be filled by external elements, this search becomes an endless race, an emotional roller coaster where the peak of euphoria is quickly followed by painful falls. And the more this hunger is fed with external elements, the more it seems to grow, demanding larger doses of attention, emotion, and intensity, like an addiction that robs tranquility and the ability to find balance. Breaking this cycle requires immense courage, as it means facing what hides behind the hunger, the pain of inner loneliness, the fear of rejection, and the absence of a genuine sense of belonging. It is a process that is not resolved by finding the right person or the perfect love, but through inner transformation, a compassionate gaze toward oneself, and learning to nourish oneself from the inside out. Only when the woman recognizes her shadow and embraces her own deep needs does this hunger lose its devastating power, giving way to a new form of desire, less urgent, less compulsive, more integrated and authentic. And then, finally, the cycle of hunger can be broken, and the incessant search can turn into a path of self-discovery and true love. The validation that addicts. When attention becomes emotional oxygen, the attention that a woman carries in her relationships may seem like a simple gesture, even a natural one, but when this attention becomes a compulsive need, it ceases to be a genuine act and becomes an emotional addiction, a form of oxygen for someone disconnected from herself. This external validation, in truth, works like an anesthetic for deep internal wounds that were never truly healed. Each compliment, each affectionate message, each demonstration of care becomes a vital breath that keeps alive the illusion that she is seen, desired, and, above all, enough. The problem lies precisely there. Validation becomes fuel for a cycle where the inner hunger is never truly satisfied. No matter how much attention she receives, this external satisfaction lasts only as long as the novelty persists, like a glass of water in the desert that quickly runs out. And when the effect fades, the hunger returns with even more strength, demanding larger doses, more intensity, more signs that she matters. The search is not for real love, but for a sophisticated distraction from loneliness, a temporary escape from the chronic feeling of invisibility and inadequacy. And those around her, wanting to be the safe harbor, often find themselves trapped in this game of highs and lows, without understanding the invisible dynamic that governs them. This dependence on external validation turns relationships into unstable ground, where affection becomes currency for emotional survival. Each unanswered silence, each absence of a compliment, each small failure in the rhythm of attention is interpreted as rejection, intensifying the fear of abandonment. The woman who lives this emotional addiction does not ask for words. She asks for signs, and when these signs are missing, she feels invisible again, that she is not loved. What seemed to be a bond of love and care becomes a trap, because the partner, no matter how present and dedicated, cannot fill an emptiness that does not belong to him. Breaking free from this dynamic requires more than external love. It requires that the woman look inward, that she reconnect with her own source of emotional life. It is an immense challenge, as it means facing old wounds, accepting loneliness, and learning that value does not depend on the gaze of the other, but on inner recognition. Until this journey happens, validation will remain a need, an addiction that steals true presence and suffocates the possibility of genuine relationships. Understanding this is essential for those who live or coexist with this reality, because the love that truly heals is not the one that tries to prove anything, but the one that simply is, whole and silent. The mirror that hurts, when presence reveals the hunger. The sincere and constant presence of someone can be a rare and valuable gift, but for someone who carries a deep internal hunger, that presence can become an uncomfortable mirror. When a woman lives with an emotional emptiness that has never been closely examined, her relationship with another is permeated by invisible tension. The partner's presence unintentionally reveals what she herself tries to hide, her own lack, the hole that seems endless. And it is this reflection that hurts, that frightens, because it exposes the truth that distraction, escape, and the search for external validation cannot hide. This mirror that hurts is not merely a game of projections, but rather the painful encounter between the need to love and the inability to accept the love that arrives. The woman facing this hunger does not reject the other out of malice, nor because he is insufficient. She rejects what his presence represents: constancy, commitment, the possibility of seeing herself whole in front of someone. This is intolerable for a soul that has not yet found peace within itself, because looking at the other is, in fact, looking at oneself. And when this gaze happens, the masks fall, revealing an inner abyss that many prefer to ignore. The escape from the mirror is an instinctive reaction, a defense mechanism that makes permanence impossible. The woman distances herself, creates subtle or explicit gaps, reduces contact, and turns closeness into silence. It is not a rejection of the partner, but a desperate attempt to flee from the discomfort that his very presence awakens. Behind this resistance lies the fear of falling apart, of facing the emptiness that still screams to be filled. Each distancing, each indifference is a silent cry for help, a plea for the pain to be seen and understood, not denied or fought. Understanding that presence can be a mirror that hurts is fundamental for those who wish to build true bonds. For love to flourish, it is necessary to recognize that the inner void cannot be filled by another person, but must be embraced with courage by the woman herself. This requires patience, empathy, and awareness not to interpret rejection as personal failure, but as a sign of an internal battle that has not yet ended. The love that truly transforms is not the one that seeks to control or consume, but the one that endures silence, fear, and the broken mirror, allowing healing to happen from the inside out. The cycle of seduction and discard, the love that turns into an abyss at the beginning. Seduction arises as a powerful spell, a hypnotic dance where the woman seems to see in the other a promise of emotional redemption. She looks with attentive eyes, listens to every word as if it were poetry, laughs, touches, surrenders, all with the intensity of someone who believes that this time it will be different. But this enchantment is not simply about the other. It is about the desperate attempt to fill a deep emptiness within herself. The partner becomes a magic mirror that reflects the idealized image of what she wants to be, of the validation she seeks, of the feeling of being alive and important. This initial phase is filled with energy and hope, but it is also the beginning of a repeated script, a cycle that few can see until the abyss begins to open. As the enchantment of novelty fades, reality imposes itself with its relentless harshness. What seemed like pure love begins to reveal cracks. Touches become distant, silences turn into walls, gestures of affection give way to indifference and coldness. The partner who once was a gateway to hope now becomes a threat, a reminder of the emptiness that has not been filled. For the woman who lives this cycle, the other's constancy exposes her inner instability and her inability to receive true love. This realization causes anguish and fear, and escape becomes the only possible refuge to avoid shattering in the face of her own fragility. The discard that follows the distancing is not an act of cruelty, but an inevitable consequence of this vicious cycle. The woman does not replace the partner with someone better, but with someone new, someone who can reignite the flame of illusion, revive the freshness of distraction, and momentarily silence the inner abyss. The repetition continues because the problem is not with the other, but with the wound that remains unhealed. Each new relationship is a fragile bridge thrown over a void that insists on swallowing everything it touches. Thus, the cycle of seduction and discard is not a mistake or a moral failure, but an unconscious mechanism of emotional survival, a desperate attempt to find relief where it can never truly be found. Understanding this cycle is essential to breaking the repetition and finding a true path to love. It is necessary to understand that the emptiness that consumes cannot be filled by another person, that the initial seduction is only a veil covering deep pain. The way out is not to try to be the exception, the perfect partner, or the magical solution, but to recognize the shadow that inhabits the psyche and face the silence that frightens. Only when the woman stops running from herself and looks inward with courage will the abyss cease to be a place of falling and become fertile ground for transformation and true connection. The brutal truth: you were never the problem. There is an inevitable moment after the end of a relationship when you obsessively ask yourself, what did I do wrong? You revisit every conversation, every gesture, every detail, as if there were a secret code that could have prevented the outcome. But the brutal truth, the one that almost no one dares to say, is that you were never the problem. You could have been more affectionate, more mysterious, more available, or less intense. None of that would have changed what was destined to happen, because the problem was never how much you gave, but how much the other person was ready to receive. When someone carries an internal void, no matter how much you try, the love you offer is always a reminder of something that is missing, not the solution to the wound. What you experienced was not a reflection of your lack of value, but of the internal conflict the other person was fighting with themselves. They did not see you as you truly are. They saw you as a mirror, a symbol, a promise of temporary relief for their pain and insecurities. In the beginning, that projection feels magical. You are placed on a pedestal, as if you were the answer to all fears and anxieties. But inevitably, the illusion breaks, because no human being can forever carry the weight of another's expectations. And when the mirror begins to show not only what enchants, but also what bothers, it is not you who is rejected, but the reflection they cannot stand to see. Rejection, in this context, is less about you and more about the other person's struggle to face themselves. It is easier to create narratives. The connection faded. You changed. I do not feel the same anymore. Than to face the open wound that exists deep within the soul. That is why so many people jump from one relationship to another, always looking for the next dose of validation, the next emotional anesthetic. They do not want a partner, but a sophisticated distraction. And when you are no longer new, when your presence no longer silences their inner pain, escape is the only path they know. This does not mean you are insufficient. It means the battle was never yours. Accepting this truth is painful, but liberating. When you understand that you were never the problem, the guilt that consumes you loses its power. You stop hurting yourself with unanswered questions and start seeing that true love is not a performance test, but a meeting of souls that have already learned to be whole on their own. If someone is not ready to look at themselves, nothing you do will be enough. Your presence, in fact, only accelerates the confrontation that the other person tries to avoid. And that is why you were pushed away, not because you lacked value, but because your truth was too big to fit into the lie they were telling themselves. Reaching this point means you had the courage to face truths that most people prefer to ignore. Now you know that you were never the problem, that the other person's void could not be filled by you, no matter how much you gave yourself fully. This understanding does not erase the pain, but it frees you from it. Because from now on, you no longer need to beg for explanations, nor feel insufficient. You see that loving someone who does not love themselves is like trying to save someone who insists on drowning. And in the end, all you can do is rescue yourself first. If this video made you reflect, do not leave without taking action. Click the subscribe button now, because this channel exists for those who want to see beyond the masks, understand the psychology behind emotions, and most importantly, learn to grow stronger emotionally. Leave your comment telling me what touched you the most in this video. And if you want to continue this journey of self-discovery, watch the next videos appearing here on the screen. Maybe they have the answers you did not even know you were looking for. Some think this was the end, but be careful. The war is not over yet. There are still things left unsaid. These 2 videos in front of you are not here by chance. And what if everything you believe about yourself is just a reflection of someone else's gaze? Click now on one of the videos beside you and start breaking that mirror. You will have to take the risk and click. So, which one will you choose?